Mas agora eu vou chamar no palco o Ryan Lackey. Não sei pronunciar. Acabei de pedir para ele para pronunciar e esqueci. Ryan. Hi. Ele vai falar sobre a construção de uma grade institucional de soluções em blockchain. Desde os anos 90 ele trabalha com formas de pagamento eletrônico, então os antecessores da criptomoeda, ele já estava participando disso. Ele mora em Porto Rico e ele participa da Tezos Foundation, está no board, a diretoria da Tezos Foundation, que são soluções, inovações sociais, políticas e econômicas, vão muito além de simplesmente investimentos. Eles têm um projeto andando agora com a BTG Pactual. E, Ryan, are you ready? Então, bem boas-vindas para o Ryan.
Obrigado. And I apologize, I don't speak Portuguese, so, or Brazilian Portuguese, or any Portuguese.
Para quem não participou de nenhuma palestra em inglês ainda, tem os headphones ali atrás que fazem a tradução simultânea, ok?
So perfect. But this is my second trip to Brazil. I love visiting here. It's one of the most interesting countries I've ever visited. I've visited a lot of countries, and it's very high on the list. Lots of smart people, lots of great stuff happening in the blockchain space. So I'm on the board of the Tezos Foundation, and I want to introduce how Tezos is useful for institutional grade blockchain applications. Just really quickly, how many of you are users of Bitcoin? Raise your hands, please. And any other cryptocurrency besides Bitcoin? Okay. And if you make a purchase that's like a routine purchase, like say buying a cup of coffee or something like that, do you spend like weeks of effort trying to make the decision, or it's a quick purchase? But if you purchase something difficult, it's or expensive, or with a lot of integration, like buying a car or a house or something like that, it's a much larger purchase. So we sort of view cryptocurrencies the same way. If you're using cryptocurrencies for applications that are sort of transactional, short-term things, it makes sense to just experiment with them. But we're working on a lot of projects now, and we're seeing a lot of projects in the blockchain space where people are putting a larger investment out front. They're doing a lot of infrastructure and everything else, so they really need to understand things before they deploy them. So hopefully this is an opportunity to explain how Tezos works and how some of these new exciting applications work and what the requirements are for this kind of application, which will work well. So I've been involved in cryptocurrency since probably 1993, which is sort of crazy because they didn't really exist back then, but a lot of people, there was a mailing list called the Cypherpunks, where we discussed the ideas of anonymous electronic cash, building all sorts of distributed exchanges where you'd be able to exchange things without governments or anyone else controlling them. And it was sort of a very, very early stage of all this stuff. And then a lot of people that work for some of the bigger Bitcoin projects, people like Adam Back, Hal Finney, Wei Dai, all these people were on the mailing list. I mean, Nick Szabo, Ian Gregg from R3, all sorts of people like that worked together on this mailing list to discuss what might happen. And what's been incredibly exciting over the past 5 or 6 years has been so many of the things that we discussed on this mailing list back in the 1990s, as maybe someday we'll build them, are now actually possible. So to go on with that, Tezos is a base layer blockchain. It's a system designed for writing very secure smart contracts. And that's sort of, it's interesting on its own, sort of in an academic perspective, but I don't really like tools if they don't let me do something. Like, I like having things that I know there's a reason to have it and there's a thing I can build with it. And I think Tezos is letting us build certain things that were very difficult or very impossible to build things before. Institutional grade blockchain, I would say, is a way of saying how to solve specific technical problems for institutions, in this case banks, real estate issuers, developers, people building large financial instruments, equities issuers, bond issuers, and we're talking about how to build blockchain-based trading systems and stores of value for large assets that exist and already exist in the real world. It's not creating a new cryptocurrency and hoping that this cryptocurrency is going to go 100x or 1,000x or 10,000x in value. As much as that was a nice thing to have, it's not really the thing that you build an economy on. What we're talking about is using cryptocurrency to create an environment, a framework where you can take these existing real-world assets, real estate, equities, bonds, everything else, and let people trade them. So you can have a Brazilian institution issue real estate-backed securities and be able to have an investor that lives in Thailand or Ukraine or England or some other place buy these assets, trade them with somebody else who lives in another country, and not have any restrictions from a technology perspective. So it's a very it's a more like B2B version of blockchain and a more of a B2B purpose for this kind of technology. But that's the difficulty is that Bitcoin was great because it started from a position of not needing, like people could adopt it. It's just like buying a cup of coffee. You could go and experiment with it. There was very low risk to trying it out. If you tried out Bitcoin, like I bought my first Bitcoin back in like I mined my first Bitcoin back in like 2011 just as a thing I could do on a machine for some spare stuff. And there was no thinking involved in like, should I invest my time in setting this up? It was, hey, this is a cool thing, I'll experiment with it and set it up. But if I was going to go set up a thing that took me a lot of capital investment, money, and time to build it, I'd want to know more about it in advance. And the banks and other financial institutions are sort of the same way when they're thinking about adopting blockchain technology. And as a result, they have a lot of requirements they put into this process that are really hard to meet. There are things like when you're issuing something, it needs to comply with all the existing regulations, which is an incredibly challenging task because Brazil, I mean, I've heard that Brazil is special from a regulatory perspective in that there's like the way a lot of other countries do things, and then Brazil does something maybe a little bit different than what some neighboring countries do, and it's often better, it's often just different. And I think blockchain is the same in the whole world. The blockchain is special in the same way of having sort of unique regulatory positions at pretty much every location. In the US, you have a securities regulator, you have a commodities regulator, you have financial regulators, you have every state has regulators, and they all are discussing how to regulate a new digital asset. And if that digital asset is something like a real estate issue, then the securities people are involved, the local real estate people are involved. There's a whole bunch of different regulations that are involved, and it's very challenging to figure out which regulations are going to apply in advance. And if it's a consumer application, then maybe you can take the perspective, okay, we'll just experiment with it and it'll work. But if it's a institutional solution, you have to convince people that have a lot of liability and a lot of risk in advance that there's a certain way this is going to work, and this is a theory of how it should work, and these are the risks. And you have to identify everything in advance. So it's a little bit different when you're doing a sort of a business solution where you have to identify these things in advance. And they have processes of requiring certification or other sort of attestation in advance. So there's a lot of difficulty there. And that's just the business side. There's also a lot of technical things. People build a lot of these solutions. Essentially what they are is very sophisticated smart contracts. And we've seen smart contracts built within the cryptocurrency space. We've seen Ethereum with their DAO and various things like that, where they build a solution and they start with it, and it needs to be, the normal way that people write software is they build something and they have a pretty good idea that it works, they test it, they deploy it, and then if it has a bug, they see it has a bug and they fix it. That unfortunately does not work as well when you have a large amount of money at risk on a system. And you see a system where there's a potential for a problem with the software to cause people to be able to extract large amounts of money from the contract when they're not supposed to. And that happened to various projects in the past. It's the famous quote is that cryptocurrency has a built-in bug bounty, in that you can just sort of profit off of a mistake that someone has made. And that's a real problem for people that are building these systems. So what we've done is we've taken a lot of people, we have a background in academic computer science, so systems of formal verification, certification, everything else, and have built a smart contract language and a smart contract platform where you can build proofs of correctness of your smart contracts. So for something like a cryptocurrency implementation of a real estate contract, you can make a statement, a specification of exactly who's allowed to transfer which assets where, and then we can do a mathematical proof that the implementation of that actually corresponds to that contract correctly, which is a pretty nice thing to have, and it helps when you're trying to convince an organization like a bank or a regulator that a system's going to work correctly. In addition, a lot of these assets are designed for being around a long time. You can get financing for a bond for a house, like a mortgage, for 10, 20, 30 years, in some countries 100 years. There's financial issues out there. There's bonds that people have issued that are called perpetuities that are basically permanent. So you can have a financial instrument that needs to live for longer than a person does. And if you have a cryptocurrency system that's being used to write smart contracts, and that system changes over time in a way that breaks the way that these contracts work, it's a serious problem, because then in the regulated world, you're just not going to get anyone to use it in the first place. So what we've done is we've sort of brought democracy to a cryptocurrency system. We allow people, based on the tokens that they hold within the system, to vote on changes in the system, which is really nice because it's a proof-of-stake system. There's really only one type of user. There's people who hold the token. There's people building things, which involves holding the token. There's people who make smart contracts, which involves moving the token around. All these things like that are very aligned incentives. So there's really only one class of user. And when we want to make a change to the system, what we do is we propose a change, and someone says, this is the exact source code we want to change. These are the files that will change. And they say, if you adopt this change, you need to pay us this amount of money for proposing this change. And they send it out to all the users of the system, and the users vote. And the nice thing about our system is we've already done this once with a vote to make a change to the system, and we got 86% of the users on the system voted to make a change. It was a very minor change, but they did accept it and accepted it. And that's a pretty high, we know in the US, people voting in elections is like 40%. Apparently when your actual money is involved, and it's a nice technology system to vote, a lot more people are willing to vote. So 86% of people voted on this proposal. We're doing another one right now with a more substantial change, but we think this is the model that you're going to end up with for how these systems are governed. They're going to be essentially, rather than having a small group of people that don't have anything to do with the users make decisions for a system, you're going to let the users of the system themselves make decisions and sort of participate in how the system evolves. And that's going to be really nice for people that need to build an asset on the system that's going to last for maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years, maybe longer. Another area that we're working on is we have projects. We have a project with BTG Pactual in Brazil. We have a project in Thailand. We have a project in UK. We have a few more projects with venture capital funds that are tokenizing, things like that. So we have existing users that are sort of the trailblazers in building assets on this platform. And they're very large amounts of money. The real estate market, I think globally the real estate market is something like $300 or $400 trillion of assets. So if a tiny percentage of the real estate market ends up being an asset that's traded on a blockchain or on multiple blockchains, then it's going to be a very large asset, and everyone has it's a much more efficient market. Right now, if you go to a stock market and you're trying to trade stocks, it's a fairly efficient system. They digitized all those things. They didn't tokenize them, but they digitized them back in the 1970s, 1980s. So they're relatively sophisticated systems. Real estate systems in various countries around the world are still paper-based. They're very challenging. They involve weeks or months to raise financing for a commercial building project, and that's the kind of area where technology has an advantage. I worked in startups in Silicon Valley for a long time, and one of the ideas there is that if you're trying to have a new solution for a project, it has to be about 10 times better than all the existing technology for people to use it, because there's lots of other costs in switching to new technology. And I think it would be very difficult to make something that's 10 times better than a current stock trading system today, at least to start with. But it's very easy to make a system that's 10 times better than a 1,000-year-old paper-based real estate system. So that's a market that's very attractive. So sort of the challenges that we faced in doing this, and what makes it interesting, is that we're building the system with the desire to be completely decentralized from day one. We raised about $240 million back in 2017 as a crowdfunding project for building this platform. And from the time we raised that money, we set up a foundation in Switzerland and decided to not have a single company that runs everything. We have a system where anyone out there in the world who has a proposal for how they want to make the change to the system can submit a proposal for grant funding and receive a grant funding. We have ranges of these. We have some that are large academic research institutions in France and Spain, in the US. We'd love to find other institutions that want to do a research program and we fund that. There's other ones where somebody has an idea for doing a marketing event and they want $5,000 or something to do a local marketing event, or $50,000 or $100,000 to build a new wallet on a new platform. And we can fund that, and then if they're successful, then they have a product that they can continue with. And it makes it a very decentralized system, which is very nice. Because we think, we have a couple of ideas that we think are good ideas. The ideas of letting the community govern a protocol and formal correctness for software. But we're certainly not anywhere near as good at building user interfaces for users as like, it's not our expertise. And our expertise is not in capital markets or in any other specific area. So we think the people who have good ideas in those areas are the ones who should be the ones actually developing these proposals and pushing them forward. All we're doing is providing a blockchain that helps them do that. The sort of the most difficult part of the system has been sort of the chicken and egg problem, where you start with something and you want to build it, but there's a bunch of regulations in place, there's a bunch of technology restrictions, and you're asking people at banks, other institutions, regulators, to make an initial investment in something that doesn't exist in terms of their time, in terms of their regulatory ability, in terms of risk, reputation, everything else. And the only way around that is to do proof of concepts, so small tests, and then find people who have the biggest problem. There's a thing in startups where you don't try to sell people painkillers, you sell them things that are like immediate life-saving aid. Like if you have a problem that's going to kill you anyway, you're much more willing to try something that is potentially difficult or painful than if it's just like you have a headache. You're not going to try a treatment that might possibly kill you. So we find problems that are more difficult to solve, that don't have great solutions. We think there's a lot of opportunity in sort of public collective action problems, where it's either an environmental problem or a social problem, where there's a lot of users that individually all want something to happen, but there's no way for the market or for any institution to coordinate whether that happens. And there's a lot of opportunity for blockchain solutions to sort of enable a group of people to fund something. So maybe sort of a crowdfunding for social activities or social good. And the other thing that works really well is things at a very small scale. We've talked about Balaji from COINBASE has the idea that right now you can go out and it's pretty easy to raise money for a very large company. If you want to build an oil company and you have you have land with oil on it and a lot of stuff, you can raise $100 million, $1 billion to do that. It's difficult, but it's an understood process. But if you want to raise $10,000 to do some small project that is going to take a lot of effort to do, and you can't do it without it, and you don't personally have $10,000, which I think 90% of the world wouldn't be able to do something like that, there's really no way to do that, because all the legal work, all the paperwork, all the overhead of trying to raise a small project like that is actually more than the amount that you would be raising. So it's impossible to do, which is an area where we think blockchain technology is going to work really well. So innovating on very small scale projects and early stage projects is a way, because there's less risk, there's less liability. One of the great things that's been announced, I only found out about it yesterday here, but we've had it in the UK and some other places, is the idea of a regulatory sandbox, where the regulator says, as long as you meet certain requirements, you say, this is going to be under a certain value at risk or a certain level of sophistication of users. So there's an idea of the regulators, they want to protect innocent people, like people's grandmothers, from making bad investments in various things. But if you're a rich, sophisticated investor, or if you're very knowledgeable about a topic, the regulators largely think you are capable of making your own decisions. So they sort of set up this little sandbox where you can set up a new project, a new technology, and experiment with it without as many regulations. And if that works, that's great, and they'll maybe expand that to a bigger project. If it doesn't work, then great, there wasn't too much risk, and it was a good experiment. So Brazil has now a sandbox for a lot of these projects, and we think this is going to be an environment where a lot of people experiment with new technology, blockchain technology, everything else. BTG Pactual has this REIT-BZ token, where it's basically a real estate investment trust where they're bundling a bunch of distressed real estate assets and letting people invest in those assets, and then that's a great way to bring it to end users and consumers as an asset. And that's sort of the first project we've seen here that's a big scale project. It's a $100 million or $1 billion project. But we think there's going to be a lot of projects that range from big projects down to small projects. And as a result, we're going to set up a Tezos Foundation, either a representative or perhaps a Tezos Foundation in Brazil, where we can help people that are in Brazil that want to build innovative blockchain applications, maybe for regulated applications, or maybe for things where there's more of a longer-term focus, where you're building an asset or taking an existing asset that exists in the real world and bringing it to the blockchain, and letting you use the technology for doing this. As well, we're working with some universities around the world, hopefully in Brazil as well, to teach the smart contract languages that we use. We wrote our own, sort of an interesting thing that happens is if you get somebody who's a super expert in a certain technology, it's like if all they have is a hammer, everything is a nail. And we have a lot of computer science, language theory, programming language theory PhDs. We have like 35 of them that work with us. And they like to write new programming languages. And I like programming languages too, but they wrote one called Nicholson. It's a very sophisticated language, or it's a very simple language, a very powerful language that's used as our base layer. And that's difficult to write actual programs in. So we built a layer above that. Lets you take Python, lets you take OCaml, lets you take other languages and write a program in that, and then translate that automatically into the underlying blockchain. So it's sort of an interesting process of learning what things are required for these kind of applications. We need things that help regulators be comfortable with the platform. One of the exciting things that we actually do think is probably, we think there's a few big differentiators between blockchains. We think being able to write great smart contracts is critical. Ethereum was by far the first one to do this, and that's why Ethereum is as amazing as it is. It was the first, it's a great platform to build things. It has some other limitations, but it's in terms of being able to write smart contracts, Ethereum is the first thing that's been out there. And the second thing that we think is big is the proof of stake. Proof of stake systems I would bet, are going to replace almost all of the proof of work systems out there except for Bitcoin, just because Bitcoin is so conservative in how they make decisions. All these estimates of if you build a proof of work system and scale it to the size of the economy, it uses more energy than like all the world combined or something like that, are pretty crazy. So I think building a system that intentionally wastes energy is not really a great idea. So proof of stake is a model that we think is going to be successful. I know Ethereum is moving to proof of stake around 2022. It's taking them a long time to do because they have an existing system that's very difficult. We started out on proof of stake. A lot of the other newer systems are also proof of stake from day one. We also think it's important that a system be decentralized, because if you build an application and you're on a platform that someone else controls, it's just like if you build something for Google app, like an Android application or an iPhone application. A lot of people have built iPhone applications, and then Apple says, hey, naughty, you can't do that because it involves blockchain or something, and they just remove them from the store and you can't use it anymore. So it's important that something be decentralized, and there's no ability for anyone to censor it in that perspective. And we think it's important as a result of that to say anyone who wants to join the system can join without having to pay anyone to be a member of an association or to be certified or anything like that. So we have a system where if you hold a certain number of tokens, you're automatically able to become a validator on the network and a full participant as one of the base layer systems. We have about 500 of these nodes around the world. Some of the competing systems out there have hard limits of maybe 21 or 100 participants in the system for running the system itself. And we have 500 now, and it's open to anyone that wants to join. I think it's important that these systems they have great applications, because sort of the horrible secret of all the blockchain systems out there is that in terms of real consumer adoption, we're still way behind. And there's not a whole lot of consumer adoption. There's some user-to-user payments that are happening with certainly people paying across borders or countries that have sort of challenging banking systems. There's some, but it's certainly not as big as we would like to have in the blockchain industry. There's lots of great technology out there and lots of great ideas, but we really need to have an application out there that is so successful that it's what drives people to use it. Because people don't go out and say, I want to use a device with an ARM9 processor and an IPS screen of a certain size and everything else. They have an application. They want to take photos. They want to call people. They want to do instant messaging. They care about the actual use of the application, not the underlying technology. And until we as a community can build something that's so attractive to end users that it's a compelling application, we're still looking for our solution. So there's that. So it's great to talk to people. We have a booth over here, the Tezos booth. I'd like to do some Q&A for about 5 minutes about technology, about blockchain stuff. Unfortunately, I would certainly prefer English questions just because it'll be easier, but I do have a translation device. So I'd like to open it up to questions. If not, I'd be happy to talk with people over in the booth later. Great. Thank you very much.
Hold me close till I get up.